My name is Michael Hasford. I am 72 years old and have terminal bowel cancer. I have not told this story to anyone in almost 50 years. The last time was before I was made to sign the State Secrets Act and forced to remain silent under threat of jail. My doctor says I have about 5 months at best, and although I can't say I have had a particularly long or happy life, I am prepared to die. My life has been longer and happier than I had any right to be, and now I will tell you why I do not care about the legal implications or whether whoever reads this chooses to believe it or not. I just have to get it off my chest, quoting a fellow Marine far more skilled than I am writing. What follows is neither true nor false, but what I know. In the summer of '66, I enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in a fit of idealism while my friends tuned in or dropped out. I followed in my grandfather's footsteps in Uncle Sam's wayward sons with a view to fighting in Vietnam. Although I had a choice of colleges on the East Coast, and my Marine recruiter had tried repeatedly to convince me to attend officer candidate school, I had made the decision to enlist as a private. I was determined to see the kind of action my grandfather took. I was determined to make him proud. That was how I found myself stepping off a C-130 transport plane in Da Nang in early 1967 as a member of Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. I was part of a combat unit that caused a lot of damage to the Viet Cong around Da Nang, and in turn suffered many casualties. One of the first images that greeted me when the belly of the transport plane opened up and the intense heat wave hit us was the thick olive green body bags that replaced our cargo. They were all full. My first week on base was tough. It was not easy to sleep because of the number of mosquitoes and the roar of the artillery outgoing, so I was relieved when I was assigned a night sentry duty. I needed something, anything to keep my mind occupied. Little did I know it was nothing more than more time to reflect, and I was beginning to seriously doubt my decision to enlist. The guys in my platoon, who were on their second tour, were talking about the reaction of the people at home. They called us baby killers, Nazis. One guy said the prettiest girl he'd ever seen wore blue and white beads and a peace button. He spat in her space as she walked down 5th Avenue in her combat uniform. Around midnight, I saw a figure approaching, and I could just make out the double bars on the shoulders of a senior officer. Captain Hydern was a legend on base. Captain in the Los Angeles Police before he joined the force. He was well respected by the men below him and a comb leader. Nice night for it, eh? I couldn't make out his face in the darkness, but his warm smile was in his voice. Yes, sir. Chill a little, surprised. Hasford, Old English name. True. Where are you from? Marie, Captain. Hydern fiddled with a large silver ring that gleamed on his finger in the dim light. North Carolina, Sir Huber. I know him. My wife has family there. We visit whenever I have time away from Lee. It must have been a wonderful place to grow up. I hear the fishing is spectacular in the spring. Thanks, sir. But I couldn't say my brother and I spent most of our time hunting squirrels with our air guns. I couldn't help but smile as I spoke. Captain Hydern, chuckled a man like me. I hunt deer near Willow Creek. There was a brief silence, and I was feeling less and less anxious. The captain had a calming presence, a true leadership quality, and something I appreciated more and more. Have you been in combat already, Hasford? No, sir. I said, a little embarrassed. I have not had the chance. You won't have to wait long, he said, pulling out a pack of cigarettes, Pall Mall, and offering them to me. One, but it will still have to wait. I led a rather secret recon mission tomorrow night, and they are not cherries, no offense, private. The captain took a long drag on his cigarette and looked at the moon for a moment before looking back at me. The moon seems much larger in that part of the world. Whatever power it holds seems amplified, hanging thickly in the humid night air. Keep up the good work, Marin. Now you make KL-35 proud. Yes, sir, I said, beaming. His mild manner had eased my anxieties, and I was determined to make him proud to have me in his unit. A few days passed before word of the captain's recon patrol began to circulate. I was working in the kitchen with a young Marin from Chicago, Corporal Lincoln Holsey, self-proclaimed soul brother, and my best friend in the platoon, Joe Hasford. Have you heard of the captain? Captain Hydern? What's wrong with him? He's not back, missing in action. They say he's gone missing. What the hell, Holsey? What do I look like? I'm the head of intelligence here. How am I supposed to know you're not missing anything? Soul brother, you're telling me that's all you've got? The captain went F to the backwoods with 5 veterans and a CIA spy. Like 3 nights ago, there's no trace of them. Since then, they've been flying over the area with helicopters looking for them, but they haven't found anyone, for God's sake. Man, what do you think has happened to them? I was incredulous that someone as seasoned as the captain could just up and disappear, at least not without leaving a trace. What's wrong with anyone around here? How could Mr. Charles disappear? He's got them, or he played smart and is on his way to Vancouver as we speak, Mr. Charles. The Viet Cong. Bro, you have to respect your enemy. Or you are. That's why I call him sir. I call my enemy sir before I send him back to the Stone Age now. Shinnin, my boy, I'll see about my trip home next month. Holsey laughed and walked out of the tent under the sweltering sun of the music. Late that night, some of us sat around the barracks, bored out of our minds, but incapacitated by the relentless heat and humidity. The shirtless Marines sat cleaning their rifles, writing, reading, or just music, chatting. I had just taken off my new jungle boots, still uncomfortable and unbroken, when our platoon sergeant pushed open the door. His thick Cajun accent was almost indecipherable, but that night we heard in his voice an urgency that bordered on terror. Get your cowboy ass out of your bunks. RNA yelled at us, pointing and barking at rifles, throwing boots at the Marines. Through the unintelligible tirade of insults and curses, we make out the undeniable cadence of first fucking combat mission. The faces blanked the bulletproof vest. As we gathered at the helipads, the helicopter blades began to spin as the pilots started their engines, and the air was filled with the loud hum of the machinery in motion. The young lieutenant in command of our platoon arrived, exchanged a few words with our purple-faced platoon sergeant, and turned to us, shouting over the roar of the Marine planes. Many of you will have heard about the disappearance of Captain Hydern's recon team a few days ago, near the village of Autran. Well, tonight I have some good news for you. The team's radio is sending out a signal. It's weak, but our signals guys are picking it up in bursts. Whoever is doing it is tapping the earpiece, trying to send a message in Morse code. What they say is garbled, but we have managed to triangulate the transmission and get an idea of the location. We think the team is alive. How about we get on those birds and bring our brothers home? Donkey, the platoon shouted in unison. Seize me fold of raw power as the weapons-laden helicopter rose, turned, and then soared into the sky towards the setting sun. After a short flight, the helicopters grouped in a jungle clearing, and then landed in pairs to land with their troops before returning to base to refuel. We waited until the beat of their rotor blades became a distant chatter, and the brush whipped by the downdraft quieted and became still. Again the lieutenant stood up and waved us away. The platoon of 26 men began to meander through the undergrowth. The jungle is a terrible place to be at night. Most of its animal inhabitants are nocturnal, so the plethora of howls and shrieks that usually emanating from daylight becomes even more sinister as darkness sets and a whole new element comes to life. As the moonlight breaks through the canopy in silvery slivers, after an hour of carrying our heavy packs, some men began to whisper among themselves. I didn't notice anything at the time. The heat was so intense and my heavy pack was giving me aches in muscles I didn't know I had. My mind was elsewhere. The fear, the stupidity of it all. There was silence. An awful silence hung in the air, and my heart sank, seeing the faces of some of the old men, those salty, devilish old dogs, eating their own guts and asking for seconds. They looked like they had just crawled out of their own graves. I guess at the time I didn't even realize how impossible it could be for such a dense jungle to be so eerily quiet at night. But I can tell you right now, I knew it was going to be bad. I would never have imagined how bad it was going to be. We moved on very fast, slowly, and for a while very aware of the loud creaking sounds our footsteps made. Repeatedly a Marine in front of us growled, and there was a violent, crunching sound as he dragged something heavy from a patch of elephant grass. He squirmed silently. "Get over there," he snapped in his New England accent. He was wearing black pajamas and rubber boots that looked like they were made from truck tires. "La Mernmayet, La Mernmayet, shut your mouth," someone snapped, and a rifle butt smacked the boy's cheek. Corporal snapped the young lieutenant moving forward down the line. "Don't mistreat that prisoner." He turned to the platoon sergeant and asked if anyone in the platoon spoke Vietnamese. "Nobody here speaks any guk." Lieutenant spat a wiry Texan in disgust. "Little bastards shitting their pants. Man, I've never seen anyone so fucking scared," laughed a Marine near me. "It's not us that scared him," muttered Tiny in a voice so deep it seemed to come from the ground beneath us. "What are you talking about?" said a Marine in the dark. "You're telling me this son of a bitch is seeing enough firepower to invade a European country, and he's not afraid? Get out of here, you fucking moron." The platoon stirred a little at the blow. Tiny was 2.5 meters tall. He had to be at least 270. This guy was huge. He kept staring into the darkness. "You know what I'm talking about, man." His eyes betrayed his terror. "There's something here, something more." The flashes and the loud cracks made us throw ourselves to the ground to cover ourselves. Someone was firing a gun very, very close to us, and the bullets were traveling just inches from our ears. Ambush, I thought, and braced myself to feel the cold blow of lead. Maybe it would tear off an elbow or a kneecap. Maybe a glancing blow to the calf that tears muscle from bone, or a dead spot that pulverizes the jugular and leaves you dead in an instant. "Stop fire." The young lieutenant shouted, "Stop fire." The Vietnamese boy was lying on his feet, with thick dark blood pooling beneath his lifeless form. The young platoon commander's face was pale and wet in the moonlight. "What did you do?" "He went for your gun. BS was about to kick your ass." "Just the Marine who fired. You killed a child, First Corporal." The lieutenant replied, authoritatively. "He wasn't a damn child. The son of was a man of fighting age. If he hadn't acted, you'd be tiger food. There he is, Mira. I'll personally see that you do time in Leavenworth. For this, you'll be climbing the walls, trying not. I was trying to kill him. Lieutenant Goldsmith rumbled tiny again. Say it again, Marine. I wasn't trying to kill him. Lieutenant Goldsmith repeated, Tiny trying to kill himself. We kicked some dirt over the dead communist's body and moved on after a while. I could make out a clearing in the treetops about 200 yards ahead of us. The lieutenant sent a few men out to recon the area. It was more of a scream than anything. Sergeant the burly Kajun came shooting forward, weaving and weaving his way through the trees. I was near the rear at the time, with the light machine guns at the front and rear of the column. We were expecting an ambush at any moment. Any Viet Cong in the area would have heard the shots that killed his comrade, and was surely on his way to avenge him. What happened between the lieutenant and the platoon sergeant is unknown to me to this day, but they came to the conclusion that we should continue with our mission, maybe out of a sense of duty, maybe out of a sense of survival, maybe a bit of both. But as my part of the line passed the moonlit clearing, I changed pace and peered out into the long grass. I have never forgotten what I saw torn off. At elbow level, full of black blood clots, was a human arm. In rigor mortis, I gripped the earpiece of a radio with white knuckles. I kept walking the last place we stopped before everything went to hell. Was this cave or tunnel? I guess a bit of both. A few guys lit their torches, and at first we felt a little safer inside the increasingly narrow passages. But when some of the guys started pointing out the unnatural patterns on the ceiling of the cave system, people started getting really fucking nervous. The few bits I could make out with the torch beams showed nightmare carvings of twisted, grinning animals and people. There were other figures in the carvings. Now the tunnels descended incredibly steeply, and some of the platoon members were slipping in the darkness. Damn, Abalo, you spit on me, didn't you, man? A shaky voice. So why keep quiet? Growled the platoon sergeant. I remember my ears ringing like in the plane, so we must have descended a long time before we got there to the crack in the rock. I am not a geologist, but it seemed that it could have gone down to the center of the earth, like a giant knife in the layers and layers of rock condensed impossible. I know, but that's what it sounded like. We called the tunnel rats, little wiry men born to crawl through tunnels. They forced their way through cracks. We waited for what seemed like an hour, and then the voices came. At first I thought it was the scouts, returning a faint whisper of voices echoing through the tunnels, but the sound grew louder, and the voices multiplied. What is that? The other Marines heard it, too. We gotta get out of here, man. We gotta go. This is so fucking bad, man. Another one shrieked. It sounded like 100,000 people whispering through the cracks. It's the only way I can describe it. The sound seemed to penetrate you. My eyes watered, and my stomach twisted. Other guys in the platoon were throwing up. I don't know what they were saying. I didn't recognize the language at the time, and I haven't heard anything like it since. Besides, by the time I stopped pissing my pants and tried to really listen, all I heard were screams, but they were clearly human from the 3 men sent ahead. Only 2 came writhing out of the cracks into the light of our torches. They were so scared, they seemed to have lost their humanity. They made no effort to articulate themselves, just howls and growls, breathless, and their eyes, Jesus Christ, their eyes, those men looked like animals. One had his shirt torn off his back, and the other was covered in blood but had no obvious wounds. The whole platoon ran off. We climbed up the steep tunnels, some men firing their rifles in the dark behind us. The men were shouting that they saw things in the tunnel behind us, that were climbing the walls, that were everywhere. I remember hearing our platoon sergeant shouting for us to stay together, and some of the men ignoring him, disappearing into the thick jungle. Some of us we grouped and took a defensive stance in a thick brush. I couldn't make out our platoon commander, but it was definitely our sergeant giving the orders. Kier Hedson Selna whispered, and turned to our radio man, telling him to disconnect and call our emergency evacuation a few minutes past, until we heard something crawling through the jungle. I took off the safety and aimed at the sound through the darkness. My heart began to race. The hairs on my arms and neck stood up. It was to my infinite relief that I heard a fellow Marine say a name in recognition. "Davis, Davis, it is you." He continued shuffling. He grabbed his field light. It lit up, and for a brief second, before the attacker lunged at Halsey and tore him limb from limb, I saw a familiar sight, but chillingly all the men still with us opened fire on the figures rolling across the deck, shedding blood and guts through the grass. We continued to fire blindly in the dark as we ran toward the approaching helicopters. Branches and thorns whipped my face, and bare arms. Men stumbled, fell, and were attacked by unseen forces. Their deep guttural screams turned to rabbit squeals as their heads were torn from their necks. We burst through the trees and into the moonlit clearing. Just as the ways reached the spot, we ran towards the flashing red lights of the troop compartments, shouting for the gunners at the door to open fire. They refused, looking at us in horror and confusion. "There is nothing there. There is no target, you moron," one shouted as they piled us up. The sensation of lifting us up into the night sky made me cry in the darkness and confusion. I couldn't tell who had made it out and who hadn't, but I turned in time to spot the tree line before they spun, and we sped away. After that I was kept isolated in Da Nang for 9 days, and never once heard or spoke to any of the other men on the rescue mission twice a day. I was interrogated by 2 CIA agents dressed in summer clothes, only for the beaches of San Diego. Their tourist attire made them even more ridiculous as they began to become more and more hostile, while I kept telling them over and over that I knew nothing that I had seen. Nothing. After a while, they brought me back to the States and told me I was going to be honorably discharged from the Marine Corps for not being mentally fit for service. No sooner when they put the long forms in front of me at Camp Pendleton and made me sign them, I listened as they listed the conditions of my release and showed no emotion when they read the possible penalties: confiscation of property, indefinite imprisonment, and so on. It was a Viet Cong ambush and a tragic loss of a young American life, that simple. Only it wasn't. I've had almost 50 years to think about my time in Vietnam and the events of that night, and I've come to some conclusions. These are the conclusions, and I use this word deliberately, as they are definitely not just theories that I feel. I must warn you all about UFO sightings, Roswell, the moon landing, all the damn cheap B-movies about Martians, meteorites, or solar flares. It's all a distraction. The idea of living space on other planets has so captured the human imagination that we have neglected the space beneath our feet. They're not going to come from the sky. They're going to come from below the caves and caverns and underground rivers for us, and we'll never be ready for them, ever. But that's not what keeps me up at night. What makes me wake up, startled in a cold sweat, with soaked sheets, signing the State Secrets Act, is not what has really kept me from telling this story, It's what that I can't reconcile from that night, what has kept me silent, the thing that attacked us in the jungle as we fled. I caught a glimpse of it as it tackled the terrified mane and drew its limbs into his chest. The face was completely mutilated, the torn lips exposed broken teeth, and the empty eye sockets held shadows in the dim light of the flashlight. The tattered cloth covering the torso was covered in dried blood and dirt, but I saw something hidden in the chest. The wrists were broken inward with sharp, tempted, and broken bones sticking out from the open wounds. But again I saw something on one of his twisted fingers. It was a Carolina State University ring, and hidden amongst the rotting cloth glimpses of red and white. Tex read, "Pall Mall, after all we had found. Captain Hydern, see you soon. Soul brother,